Good afternoon and welcome to Art Basel Conversations. My name is Mary Spirito. I'm the curator of the conversations, and I do it with my colleague Annalie Graf, who's here as well. Annalie. This talk is called Performance and the Body, and I'm very excited that you guys could all make it. Ed Atkins, an artist based in Berlin. Jay Pather, Adjunct Curator of Performance at Zeitz, MOCAA in Cape Town. And RoseLee Goldberg, also known as a birthday person, founding director and curator of Performa in New York for many years. And we're very lucky to have a great moderator today, Kathy Noble, who's a writer and a curator based in London. And welcome all of you.
Thank you so much, Marie. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. The title of this panel, as Marie said, is Performance Beyond the Body. I think we all reacted to the title in slightly the same way. It seems to allude the idea of a live performance occurring without a human body in it, or perhaps another type of body enacting the performance. And I think it leads to various questions about what performance might be today, and in the context of visual arts in particular, and also more what constitutes a body, what a body might be. It also, I think, points quite specifically towards changes that have occurred over the last 30 or so years in relationship to the technological revolution, the internet, the change in the way we live. And of course, artists have embraced and experimented with the different technologies and with the different things that are out there. They work online, they work with virtual reality, CGI, digital animation in very exciting ways. But I think what has occurred doesn't really point towards a removal of the human presence in performance. Rather, it seems more of a kind of general paradigm shift in the way we all live, and also in the attitude and the behavior of artists. And, you know, they very cleverly instrumentalize these technologies, but I don't think it leads towards an elimination of the human body. So we have three brilliant panelists here today to discuss some of these ideas. So I think it would be great if we could start with you, RoseLee, and talk a little bit about your own experiences and your work in relationship to what you've done, and more specifically, I guess you wrote one of the first books on the history of performance that covered a vast range of art movements from the whole of the 20th century, including Bauhaus, constructivism, futurism, and it was very much thinking about what performance is, and also kind of seeing the history of visual art through the lens of performance. And you obviously set up Performa.
I'm happy to talk to everyone. Actually, I'd like to ask everyone to come forward and show me your bodies, if you don't mind. Why don't you come further forward, because we feel very separated. Hi, Robert. Nice to see you. I hope you don't mind me just stepping up, you know. It's really important, and I just feel that way we can really be in conversation. So we're talking about bodies, okay. Maybe you just want to touch the body next to you, because we're all disagreeing with this idea that there is such a thing. So just touch whoever's sitting on your right. Give him a squeeze, please. Give him a squeeze. Okay. So, it's very hard to sit down when I'm talking, so I'm going to stand behind you. So in 1979, 4 decades actually, I wrote a book on the history of performance art. And really the starting point for that, especially because we were in a serious art environment here, was to rewrite 20th century art history as we know it, and really put back live performance into all those parts where it's been left out. And that's really was the starting point with thinking about what is artist performance. So that book, if anyone is looking for it, it's still around, it's still in print, and I'm constantly updating it. The point being, again, to look at art history, to look at contemporary art, to look at the art that's even on sale here, and talk about the role of artists and the way they look at performance in their entire thinking about what is art and culture. So that was the first point with the book. I was then also running a place called The Kitchen in New York in the late 70s, and gave Cindy Sherman her first one-person show, and Robert Longo, and David Sally, and all the artists that we think of now as the 80s artists, the media generation that I call them. And again, showing that a lot of that early work was coming out of performance. Again, going back always to, in a sense, convince the art historians, the critics, the academics, that performance is a central part of art history. It's not a sideshow. It's not something you just go to at the end of the day for a little bit of diversion from looking at solid art, the objects. It's actually part of the artist's life. In many ways, looking at the history of performance is like looking at the life of the artist, who's sleeping with who's not talking to who's dancing with whom, and so on. So that's really the starting point. The second quick point for you to know about is in 2005, I started a new biennial in New York, a very different kind of biennial, to take that exact point, to say performance is not a sideshow. It needs its own specialist way of thinking about what do artists do live, what does the live mean in their repertoire. And that was really something that's changed. I think I'll let others speak for that, but people feel that Performa has changed the way we think about live performance around in many different parts of the world. Just to show you some of the slides, I'm not going to go over them specifically, but one of the key things about Performa was creating the Performa Commission. And all the work is commission new. It's made by artists, many of whom have not made live performance before. It's rather this working with artists who are very excited to step into an entirely new world that they haven't stepped into before. So Robin Rode, a South African artist, actually we gave him Times Square. He did a Schoenberg opera in the middle of Times Square with a 20-member orchestra. The next one we're coming up with, I'm not sure, is Zanele Moholi, a wonderful South African artist. Last year, we really took this idea of activism all the way to Times Square, the major crossroads, and very excited to be able to get Zanele right there in front of everybody. She was determined, we were determined to work with her to put the artist's face. She said, I want my African face, my LGBT face to be in the most public place that you can find in New York. I said, we will get you Times Square, and we delivered Times Square. Adam Pendleton was a young artist who worked with us in 2007. Who's now become quite a really terrific, well-known artist. This was a very early piece that people still talk about, which is a really critical piece. So I'm not going to take you through all the commissions, but I would. The Barbara Kruger was this last biennial that we just came out, that really, as the expression goes, blew everyone away. It was a way to say to Barbara Kruger, come, take New York, and we will do whatever you would like to do there. So one of the events we did with her was taking over the skate park and using her language just in a Trumpian world of politics to be able to put this very subtle message into the streets of New York with her skateboards and so on. Another artist who works a lot with internet, which we'll be talking about, and technology, which is, I guess, the starting point for this idea of performance without the body, is Juliana Huxtable. I will not take you through the whole story because we have some fantastic speakers here, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of my own background. Thank you.
Thank you. Jay, it would be really great if you could talk a little bit about your own work in South Africa in relationship to being a lecturer and a curator, some of the festivals you've worked on too, particularly in that context.
Sure. I curate a festival called the ICA Live Art Festival. It's ICA because of the Institute for Creative Arts, which I also direct. When it first started, we were quite optimistic about life in South Africa, and so we wanted to do the whole span of live art from activism all the way through the digital commons. So there were quite a few works that spoke to the absence of the body, and you'll find, I mean, that's Nelly Sibit-Klaber, who was working with live camera in a way that's not unknown in the rest of the world, but in the early years of South Africa, this was quite something. And the Vaughan Sadie and Dean Henning created a work entirely with no body. There were sensors that depended on the audience's presence to activate a room, which set off a series of triggers of light and sound, which then enlivened the room in a particular way. So there were quite a few of these experiments. Sanyan Muftik, James Webb, who has exhibited quite widely. But in around about 2014, the body began to emerge more and more in the wider political and social context of South Africa. That's James Webb. A political and the vulnerability and of the body, the resurges in South Africa with the continued economic inequalities, especially around the retention of wealth and land inside of South Africa. And then, of course, with the massacre that happened at Marikana, with the killing of 34 miners, the body resurges as a space of great discontent, and specifically the black body, as it does in the United States, as it does in migrating populations throughout Europe and in large parts of the world. So I think the artist's response has often been the retention of the body, a kind of a fierce vindication of presence, that absence and invisibility and visibilities become crucial points of contestation. And so, the body resurges as the central point. But I think a more nuanced approach to the digital commons begins to then take over, where artists, there we go, there's Dean Henning. Dean, who identifies as both man and woman, has a work called Fuck White People. And what they do is they dress up in these various outfits around whiteness, and then develop conversations in various parts of the city around, it's not about fucking white people, but about fucking the whiteness in one. And with particular reference to a kind of post-colonial retention of whiteness inside a space like South Africa. Now, they received a number of death threats, and no less than by the Ku Klux Klan itself, and so we couldn't expose their body in a public space. So what they did was they appeared in a more closed space and had a closed circuit projection of the work on a colonial statue in the middle of the city, and I think that was a very subtle reference to working with the digital media, but working in a way that still prefaced the body and what it signifies, and there's several works like that. I have this slide to just to talk about the common body. When we talk about the body in South Africa, the commonality, sorry, not the common body, but commonality, a body as a group of people, as a collective, rather than as an individual, which brings me to Clea's work. Clea is a collective of black women who have responded to being excluded from galleries and formed this group. And they very often refuse to perform, even though they were known as a performance collective, also challenging this idea of the black body as a constant performing thing. And that was Vaughan Sadie's installation. So I think, it's interesting that the festival has spanned this form of of repositioning the body, but and working within electronic media, working within even sometimes with an absent body, but with a very clear indication of the vulnerable body.
Ed, would you? Thank you. I've seen you present live spoken word work, but also when I think of your work, I mainly think of video works. I also really think of you as a writer who evokes the body in a very, very visceral way, in the way you use language. So even when the body's not there, the body is still there. And also, obviously, you create digital bodies or CGI bodies in your videos. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about one of your more recent works called Old Food, that involves a series of different costumes and other things.
Sure.
You go for it.
I think I'll give a little sort of potted overview and then maybe land on the more recent work, because it generally applies, I think, is this idea, I think, to pick up on this this idea of resistible bodies, or bodies that and part of the role of an artist potentially to kind of retrieve or hold on to the body in the face of a kind of more or less voracious attempt by at least the language and the systems of digitization. I mean, the ubiquity of a term like immaterial or dematerialized, which kind of tends to insinuate itself within the language and then swap out as something that is literally happening. Whereas actually, obviously, bodies are not being disappeared literally. There's not a sort of after the body in relation to this title of this conversation. It's just that the visibility or the body itself, and not necessarily the definite article of the body, but a body or a particular body is being deferred in some way. So often the act of the technology will be a kind of sleight of hand to disappear the body in some way, to make it harder to understand a technology indexically, for example. So, digital media, it's very hard to understand who touched it, when, who made it, what went into it, what kind of experiences of trauma or whatever that a body poured into it. So all of my work generally has at its core this idea of retrieving bodily experience in the light of all that has sort of been disappeared by the tech. So it's often a case of kind of an emphatic underscoring of the artifice of what's absent, what's really not there, what's not possible within the digital, what these avatars or surrogates or these things, which are pretty much sort of laced with my own kind of autobiography to a certain degree. But they're always sort of, I mean, in the recent works, every character is constantly weeping. In other works, they're going through kind of bodily experiences. In a very early work, they asked to, maybe you could check the mole on their shoulder or something. So they kind of heretically pastiche what a body is. And they're very discomforting for that, I think. But more often than not, this mode of address is an attempt to really underscore the body of the viewer who is in front of them. So they often address the body of the viewer just as much as they do as a kind of a body in a cinematic kind of pose or something. So in the cinema, I guess you're supposed to sort of leave your body behind and enter into the kind of fantasy, and the suspension of disbelief could be total in some way, whereas the experience that I'm often after is one where the awkwardness of your own body in viewing this thing, in being with it, in its address to you, how it's sort of daring to demand some empathetic situation or be grotesque in certain ways, that's part of it, is that the body of the viewer is just as much kind of called into the frame, almost to be the bodily surrogate of all of the bodies that are not there in the work. Every sort of material aspect of the work that is precisely not there is kind of conjured, hopefully, within an experience of the viewer in front of these things. And this recent work, Old Food, really pushes this into a kind of historical fantasy. So basically this idea around the digital being that its greatest sort of trick in a way, and this is an old sci-fi idea, is the idea that technology is successful in as much as it's indistinguishable from magic in some way, and therefore is successful when our own ignorance of its processes is sort of total in some way. So what do you do with that in order to bring it back. And I guess for me it becomes a kind of affective terrain. What does it feel like to experience a kind of pervasive melancholy within the technology? What is that kind of loss? How do you get that back? Because if it, the reality is with digital technology, it's sort of impossible to find those bodies or to speak for them or to do something, but to kind of introduce some affect into that situation and to really hopefully sort of feel the visceral aspects of the video is that's what to retrieve bodies from the digital mire of figuration, I suppose, would be the thing,
Because I wanted to ask you, and I feel like you may have answered this question already a little bit, but I think your work does deal with it so specifically, how you define a body, because it's obviously, that's a philosophical question, but in the old food work, you had a number of different quotes. One was from Mike Kelly, that was from Playing with Dead Things, which is an essay he wrote for an exhibition called The Uncanny, and The Uncanny was this huge show he did in 1993 at Sunspeak, and he amassed numerous figurative works by artists from throughout the 20th century, alongside kind of non-figurative art objects like anatomical dollies, cuddly toys, etc. And in this quote, it says, "Everyone knows how the body is organized and how many of each part he or she has. This is given and is never thought about. To become aware of these particulars, one must imagine oneself unwhole, cut into parts, deformed or dead." And I guess for me, what that's saying is like something very extreme has to happen to us before we can imagine something else that isn't the kind of human form of the body, which comes back to this, I guess, the technology question and this title question of performance without a body, but all data exists via a human body. And I guess, back to Ed, what kind of led you to want to think about Mike Kelly in relationship to the body?
I think what he's talking about is kind of a fundamental idea around abjection and that as a process that could potentially retrieve, so it's a not standard, but the idea that you don't really think about having legs unless they go wrong, or you don't, it's through trauma that some searing sort of corporeality might return in some way. Because obviously, in order to function in the world, most of us have to kind of suspend a constant apprehension of our body's functionality or lack thereof. That's a very particular sort of line on it. And obviously, a lot of people live in situations where they're not necessarily afforded that kind of suspension of disbelief. But in terms of creating work that might somehow broach that barrier, I guess that was always the idea. And the Mike Kelly thing, it's exactly that thing, is we all know how it works, but we don't think about it at all, And that's a kind of, that's billed as a necessary thing, that we need to forget about bodies and their function or dysfunction or their traumas or their violences engaged with them in order to keep going, to progress, to kind of function in some way. Which it's a slippery, Sorry. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm chomping at the bit here. I just think we're getting a little too specialized for most people who are, we're talking, in a way, this title of the body, it's assuming that people know much about artist performance or the live. It's more about that. I think Ed is a wonderful example of somebody who's pushing towards that edge to using a lot of new technology, and probably you're here because you know his work, but also in a conversation we just had in Berlin, his body, his own personal body, is always right at the core of everything that he makes. I again dispute this title because I think it's pushing us a little bit into this idea. It's like when video art became video art in the 60s, as though, now everybody's going to have their own TV and everyone's going to make television and so on. I think we're jumping ahead because we haven't really even begun to see what artist performance really can do and what this body in the 21st century, the live body, is about. In the sense of what can artists do with live performance. So I find it a little, it just pushes us into a very specialized field where we're talking about the way that Ed is an example of an artist very specifically using technology when there's an entire field, or in South Africa, or in different parts of the world, in India, in anywhere outside of a kind of this particular part of the world that we're in right now, where live performance is part of the culture. And I don't think there's going to be this sudden turn to artists all going techno. I mean, it's as Laurie Anderson once said, she said, I'm so tired of all this conversation about technology, I'm going to start something called the Lead Pencil Club. I just want to use a pencil again. And I think an artist's job most of the time is actually to poke that pencil into the technology, to say, I don't want to spell perfectly. In fact, most of the time, you stupid spell check giving me the wrong word. I didn't ask for that word. So we're talking also about resisting technology. And I think that's where Ed's work is a really wonderful, sits on that edge between both giving into it because he's using that language, and we're talking here about languages. He's using a language of very advanced artificial intelligence. Well, give me the right terminology. I'm probably not using it properly.
Just CGI or something.
CGI or something. But he's also interfering with it and annoying it and kind of twisting it and disturbing it. So it's that play I find what's interesting is with artists who work with technology because their own personalities take them in that direction. It's not like suddenly everybody's going to use technology. But what Ed does with that technology is actually poke it in the eye. He's showing us what a tech person does not do with technology. So I'm intrigued rather by the resistance. The live is always the irritant. I mean, I'm sure you've all been to see the Bruce Nauman show, and if you haven't, you're in for a huge treat. But drawing for drawing, image for image, object for object, where am I leading? It's about the body. It's always his body. He has this gorgeous big pipe thing, and it says his knee magnified 10 times or 6 times. Every piece of work in that exhibition is the body. So, which also goes back to performance, and in fact it ends very poetically and very beautifully with this film of this much older Bruce Nauman in contrapposto, this gorgeous film, but it's always the body. And I think that's maybe should be my mantra for today, always the body. There is no body without a head. There is no performance. There is no art without a body. You make that gesture. A wonderful conversation I had with William Kendridge once about why being on stage informs his drawings, because he learned, he said, how to stop his hand at an exact moment when he was studying theater. And he uses that same discipline with the drawing. So the drawing is coming out of the body. The drawing is a performance. Julie Moretti will talk about the drawing, the painting as a performance, as an extension of her body. On and on, we're always looking at the performance of the artist, the physical performance. And similarly, Ed will still come back to that because he starts with his own body. He touches it, he feels it, and then he exposes it to us through another medium, but it's still always the body that's right there at the heart of it.
Go on, Jay.
Shall I?
Yeah.
So maybe we're getting to the point of making distinguishing between the body and presence, because there is the physical body, but I think what makes live art or performance anarchic or potentially anarchic is the presence of liveness, and in a gallery of objects, you have the possibility of anything. In the show that you were talking about, there were the dancer that was standing against the wall or sitting against the wall, and in a whole field of objects, you suddenly have to confront presence, and in that confrontation with presence, anything can happen. And I think that potential for anything happening is the limitless possibility for the human spirit to recreate itself, whereas the object is finite. It finishes, it ends.
I suppose it depends if the performance, if the idea of the performance sort of ends with the prescribed performers, or whether actually the people coming to see the thing are also part of the kind of, possible bodies, that they're bringing that to it in such a way that they could also bring their own sort of threat of anything happening, in terms of their choice to leave or to interact or to smash or to... obviously most of the time none of those things happen, but with an object, I suppose. But what kind of response might be drawn out as well as a kind of reflexive sort of performance? A body understanding seeing itself again or something, Yeah.
And do you want to talk about how you use the body? I'm just so curious about the body in making your images, the ones we see here that are so disturbing and so intense, and they do force you to pay attention. They force you to come up very close.
Yes. So they all begin with performance, in as much as
that's what I wanted you to say.
Yes, yeah. It's me in front of a motion capture camera, pulling ludicrous faces. There's so much of interest in the interaction in that moment, and actually how historically sort of how many precedents there are for this in terms of artists first taking home a Portapak camera and staring into it in their living rooms. That sort of narcissistic clinch is just extended with this sort of technology where you're animating what is a sort of insanely accurate mask that you then put on, and it certainly, like masks, affords access to certain kinds of performance that you wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily do as me, I suppose. But yeah, that thing of weirdly, the technology is insanely lacking in nuance. It doesn't understand a lot of facial stuff. You have to really caricature every single expression and enunciate for it, as if this technology, as an audience in a way, that you're trying to get a response out of the correct response or something. So, yeah, all of the work begins with me doing that, and then that will be transferred onto a 3D model and then rendered. And just to draw attention to that word rendered, I think it's often the language around the digital kind of tells you maybe something of the symbolic reality the reality that's actually sort of somewhere deep down. And rendering is obviously a deeply violent word, Even as I send a file off to a render farm, which is again bananas, that you send a farm off to a sort of what in my head is like a battery chicken industry or something, where thousands of computers will render this thing. But so yeah, you're constantly reminded. It's sort of inescapable. The etymology of the entire language around this thing is deeply attached to the body, to ways of transforming the body that are violent, to represent the body, to capture, performance capture. It's already a kind of entrapment in the language, I suppose. So, it's sort of reading the tech on that level, which it doesn't want to be revealed as, I suppose.
I wanted to ask, excuse me, RoseLee and Jay a little bit, in relationship to context, presenting performance in very different contexts, and what the body of the audience and what the body of the performer might mean in those different contexts. Because you've both done quite radically different projects in different circumstances. And Jay, we talked a little bit about the activist body.
I think all the time about the audience, as I do right now today. I feel it's absolutely essential to grab you, to feel a connection. Otherwise, why are you sitting here and not walking around outside in the sun or something else? I think the body, that relationship with the audience is primary. I think it's with an object in the room as well. I think when you walk through the Nauman show, for example, or the Sam Gilliam painting show, this glorious exhibition also in another part of the city, Whether it's static or not so static, these huge, colorful paintings that Gilliam's been doing and hanging them from the ceiling. These are physical spaces that you're entering into. You're always inside the work. You're always in relation to it. If you're not, it's just because maybe there's been not enough attention paid to what that means to enter into an artwork. I think the physicality of a space, the physicality of hanging a show, is absolutely critical, and the good curator knows that. The good curator will take you around a corner or let you have a view from afar that you're always in that relationship to the body. And I think both Jay and I, and Jay will take it from here, growing up in Durban, South Africa, where the body is so, this conversation, it's politics, it's daily life, it's a physicality that comes also with growing up, I think, in southern climates. Sorry, I don't think you understand what I'm talking about if you grew up in Switzerland. It's about being very, very physical. I again, think that every aspect that we live and move through in the art world, whether it's a painting, a sculpture, an installation, or entering Ed's world of CGI, is going through my eyes, my body, my physicality, and that relationship is always in my mind, ongoing as a curator, a writer, a thinker, and audience member, and producer, and commissioning. I don't know. That's my response.
Sure. Well, to take off from that, there was a work by Mamela Nyamza that was commissioned by Avignon, and it was called 19 Born 76 Rebels, which referenced the 1976 protests in South Africa, which was a big turning point. And it's just interesting just to watch the video representation of that, where the response to it is quite, it's like you would watch a performance art piece and on a stage. And I took the work and I positioned it in the Cape Town station, outside the Cape Town station, where there's a teeming group of people moving back and forth. And it was a chance, to take this piece of quite violent performance art in the middle of the Cape Town station. And the response was quite phenomenal, because the references and the very subtle references were obviously picked up, not intellectually, but picked up quite inside of the bodies. And it turned out into quite a celebration. So it wasn't such a dire and dark piece after all, as it was at Avignon, but in South Africa, it became quite celebratory of the capacity for the body to express this great difficulty. But it's just interesting around activism, though, that social media has been touted as quite an important aspect of Cairo and various parts of even in the African continent around activism. But ultimately, I'm not always sure about that, because with that kind of activism, you could and you could subscribe to it in a very disembodied way and still feel that you're participating, right? But you're not. Ultimately, it's when the body is present that when you show up at meetings and you show up at the march, and you there is that physical presence of hundreds of bodies that are doing this, that I think that finally turns things around. I don't know whether I'm being an old-style Marxist activist type here, but it's that when that is brought to the fore, something else happens. And I wonder about the kind of cell phone activism, and whether, to some extent, taking the body out of the equation makes flattens the cause.
I mean, I would say probably just on one level, social media and all these things are just more of a catalyst for bodies coming together in those circumstances, or people being a little bit more aware of certain things. But I think from what everyone has said, including I agree with all of it, that no technology exists without the body. Human beings made all the data. The data is still being made. Like a sentient AI doesn't exist yet. On that note, though, perhaps Perhaps we should go to some audience questions. Does anyone have any questions? I think there's some roving mics either side. No? Oh, one here.
What I kind of understood now is that, in a way, everything is a performance. That's what I took out of this talk, in a way. And I wanted to ask, where is the limit of a performance, maybe? Or, yeah, that's...
A limit to performance.
If everything is a performance, is there a limit? I mean, this is a performance.
Well, I mean, depending on the thing that's performing, I suppose, that it has mortal limits or whatever, you know.
I don't think we're saying everything's performance. I hope we can correct that if that's what you're taking away. We're saying the very specific languages. Perhaps maybe one of my comments as a historian who looks at this very big field is in a way that there's still so little knowledge about the art world and performance. It's like people say to me, well, what's your definition of performance? Well, what's the definition of painting? You know, these are very specific languages that we're looking at, very specific history. So I don't want you to take away that idea. Maybe I took it a little bit far when I said I measure the relationship with the viewer, with the reader. I mean, this has been, you know, with my audience, but I'm definitely not saying everything is performance. I think all of us are way too specialized for that.
I think there's another one here in the front row.
Well, I'm very thankful, RoseLee, that you made that clear, because there's this famous quote by Joseph Beuys, everybody's an artist, that is mistaken so many times. It doesn't mean that we are all artists, but everybody has the capacity to create, to be artistically active. And I think it's very important that we are also aware, I want to just add that musicians are performing music. They usually are not aware of that. They don't really feel so much that they are breathing human beings playing an instrument. But whatever we do in the art process, being a sculptor, a painter, or a digital sculpture like Ed, I mean, everybody is using the body. The brain is also part of the body. The breath, being tired, is part of the body. Looking for food or meeting people, being a social human being, is part of our human existence. And I think it's so important to never forget also us as the consumers or the producers of art, that we are all connected. And maybe that's what, again, being specific, what the performing art scene in New York tried to express in the 60s, that we get back that awareness. And going from there, it has a lot to do with presence. I mean, people like John Cage and Morton Feldman, those people with long-duration music, they wanted to teach us also our relationship with time. And maybe that could bring me to a question to all of you. What role plays time in the context with performance? Because I think the time-based aspect is something we should maybe reflect on, because I think the limitation of time we have of our human existence being mortals, also disappearing. The piece about Bruce Nauman speaks about the absence, the disappearing of the body. Maybe that could bring us maybe to a last question, time and body and performance as a question.
Yeah, there is. I think that the issue, the notion of time answers the previous question about when does performance end, because we have to end. You know, things and things die, and it's a terrible thing, and that's what performance does. I think it's a hyper vindication or a hyper inscription of time, and to make one so aware of through one's own presence or the presence of the artist. But I think that I think more than anything else, it's about the absence of time, the potential for death. And in that way reminds us of our vulnerabilities, and probably also in more classical African ritual throws us back to a sense of commonality or a sense of common consciousness to massage that and to cushion that sense of death.
I mean, I would say that I guess what I was saying earlier about these videos is that they are precisely not alive in their moment, even as they begin with my body and they address bodies. In and of themselves, they represent some sort of terrible timelessness, you know, that they are purgatory in some way, that it's like a Sisyphus or something, you know, that they're kind of, thank God we're not in that. And actually the kind of mortal limit of a real body is a sort of point of exquisite celebration as well as, you know, and a valuable sort of experience-based thing of holding on to that. But I think, yeah, part of the profound melancholy in my work is precisely the ceaselessness of it all, that it is unlimited, unlimitedly trapped in that, you know.
I think just, yes, a good question about time. In some ways, just getting back to the Performa Biennial, I often felt the reason for these commissions is to try to stop time for a while. The statistics are that most people go through an art gallery or a fair and look at things for less than 30 seconds. So to actually spend time with an individual artist's ideas or to actually absorb the visuals of that work and not speed through it, or to spend, and this is not even about, this is actually more about a framing of time, but to actually spend time, not just time, but stay through it, to actually go through that change that being in front of a work will start to do. I mean, I don't know, have you measured how long people really, your films or your installations feel like there can be 10, 15 minutes, but probably most people are in and out in a much shorter time frame. You know, it's just that idea of how do you hold time?
You're right. I mean, I would maybe wrongly, that's a big part of making them, is to try and hold them there, is to be in the clinch for as long as possible.
And with the end result, to change the feeling that we have about time and about ourselves, to actually open up one's brain cells to the humanism that's inside the work, to spend time getting to know what Ed's talking about, not just because, oh, we should flatter you by spending more time with the work, but actually to absorb what he's thinking about. You know, in a way, it's spending more time with the artist's ideas that I feel very strongly about. It's not just a concept of time. Cage gave us that in a very particular way, but he also said, you will sit here and you will hear things you never heard before. I demand that you spend time with this work in order to understand the concept. So these are very specific moments in the way that the artist works, but it's really, to me, to stop time, to spend time with the artist's ideas. Let's listen to the artist. That's why we're all here. That's why we're all at the fair. That work over there that we're surrounded by is made by artists who spend day in, day out thinking about humanism and humanity in the world in which we live. And I think we need to give them time. That's what I feel.
I wanted to say a very similar thing to RoseLee, in that I've worked on many commissions of performances and done many live works with other artists in my life. But the thing I love about it is it always stops me, and and I watch it. And often, even in things that I've programmed myself, I possibly don't like them at the beginning, but as it goes through and as it passes and I become more engaged in whatever this live experience is, I find myself changing my mind. And performance is very often the thing that surprises me most. And that very much is to do with this thing that you do, as RoseLee was saying, stop and take it in and possibly think about it in a different way. And I think that's really important.
Thank you.
And when I think about Atkins' figures or characters and their inability or their struggle to communicate with their own voice, and but then look at the body and for the lack of a better word, body language they use, I wonder if we can say in times of constant communication, but at the same time constant miscommunication, and a lack of understanding. What role does the body as a tool of communication plays the performing body?
I think this goes back to the anything can happen idea of a body. You know, this, and although it's obviously rehearsed and recorded in the videos, this idea of the body interrupting so-called coherence or understanding or just language or the tools that we might usually use to understand one another or presume understanding, you know. And I think that my work is sort of laced with rhythms of bodily return, almost sort of like ticks or sort of going wrong, you know, that they go wrong in order to both sort of ape a kind of authenticity of a body, but also to appeal. I mean, if anything, the characters are constantly appealing for something. They want to be afforded in some way, not necessarily understood and not known, but to be allowed in some way. There's a kind of, maybe allow their incoherence. Don't try to, you know, acquire knowledge from them and use them in some way, but they have this kind of profound empathetic need, you know, to just be allowed to say, you know what I mean? You know, and that's just a communion in that way, however abstracted and however desperate and essaying of other things. I think that address is what they want, and that's what the body that they pretend to have is doing, I think.
Are there any other? Oh, sure. One last question, and then I think we're at time.
Здравствуйте все. Можно ли поговорить с вами по-русски? I love speak Russian. Okay? Speak Russian?
Wonderful. No, but
No?
thank you.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was one of
Jay.
RoseLee's